Welcome, everyone. I'm Dick Deming. I'm Medical Director of Mercy One Cancer Center and the founder of Above and Beyond Cancer. Welcome to our weekly cancer education series. It's brought to you in part by a grant from the Iowa Oncology Society. And my guest this evening is Blaire Massa. Welcome, Blaire.
Thank you for having me.
Blaire is the CEO of Ballet Des Moines, and we're going to talk about the therapeutic healing properties of dance as movement therapy. So, you ready?
Sure.
But before we talk about that, tell us a bit about yourself. Where did you grow up?
I actually grew up in the UK, so I am not from around here. I was born to, my mother was a ballet dancer, and so dance was a little bit in my blood, and there are a lot of musicians in my family also. So the music-dance connection, I think we'll probably touch on a number of times in the conversation, and that runs very strong in my family. So I was just really lucky to be a part of a family that valued arts alongside education. And in the UK, things look a little different than they do here in terms of education and structure, but I went through school there and went to college. I actually went to the London School of Economics, so nothing to do with dance or music. But then I immediately went right back to teaching and actually taught through college, taught primarily ballet, other dance forms as well, and some musical theater stuff, so some singing. And after college, started traveling with those skills. So I taught internationally, 4 or 5 different countries over about 5 years, 6 years, and then moved to Washington, D.C., I think 2009 or so. And I was in D.C. for how many years is that? I don't know. 7 years maybe. And then we moved here just at the beginning of the pandemic. So I've been in Iowa nearly 4 years. Okay. And I have in my career bounced back and forth between arts, nonprofit, leadership, and early childhood education, which is part of the reason that I have, I think, the connection to some of the work that you're doing. I was really lucky to work in educational establishments that allowed me some professional development in neurology and developmental sciences and just a lot of geeky stuff that I loved that I wasn't needing for my administrative role, but I got to be a part of. And so I've learned a lot that way, and then also parenting my own kids. So learning about how the brain works. And
so your life experience, I mean, everything from, I'm sure, you shared your mother was a ballet dancer. I assume like a professional
she was.
Ballet dancer. So you had performing arts in your education, but then you did throw in that you went to the London School of Economics.
I did.
So obviously some brain stuff going on. You must have been really torn at some point in your early adulthood, or right as you transitioned from what we say in the United States, from high school to college, about which direction you were going to go. A performing arts, athletic dance versus a more, I shouldn't say more cerebral, but something that is more business oriented.
I would say that I was lucky in a lot of respects because I am pretty tall. Now, things have changed. This was a few decades ago. But a few decades ago in the UK, being 5'9" and trying to dance professionally did not go together very well. If you put me in a pair of pointe shoes, I'm well over 6 feet tall, and imagine lifting someone that tall up into the air. There's just a lot of logistical complications to very, very tall dancers. Nowadays, especially in the United States, our company has many dancers that are taller than me, female dancers. And so it is a very different situation now. But decades ago, when I was looking at those decisions, I had always been able to, I didn't do much except academics and ballet, I'll be clear, but I think that one of the many benefits, certainly that I've witnessed, both through my own journey, but also a lot of my students, is that the dedication and the commitment that ballet takes when you take it to that pre-professional level really does assist you in building a skill set that is valuable beyond measure in any pursuit. So in many ways, they fed off each other. The pursuit of excellence in one led to the pursuit of excellence in the other. And so while I was a strong student, I loved economics. I will admit that when I got to London School of Economics and found out that it was all statistics and less theory, I got a little less excited about it. And I was still teaching at the time. I'd started teaching early because I knew I was tall and I didn't want to pursue the very hard road that is a professional dance career. And again, I'm grateful for all of those choices because it allowed me to, many dancers spend time trying and then have to reinvent themselves. And I never had to go through that process. I started teaching and immediately fell in love with working with the kids and seeing how being in the environment of a dance class, whether, like I said, that was a tap class or a very structured ballet class or musical theater, which I got to teach memorably in the South Island of New Zealand, where they hadn't heard of Wicked yet, and I got to be the one that introduced them to Wicked. So I'm still probably on the wall somewhere as very important part of that town's trajectory to popular culture. But watching the kids flourish in that environment, not only in terms of their artistry, but in terms of their focus, their curiosity, their confidence, those are all things that I realized very quickly were extremely rewarding for me. So it was difficult to leave college, and all my colleagues at LSE went on to be investment bankers and lots of other probably slightly higher earning potential careers. But I really had very little interest in following those. And I credit my now husband for saying, you like teaching. You've been doing it for 5 or 6 years now. And I used my teaching chops to take me internationally, which again was something that at that age, I think everybody is torn between having adventures and getting on the career path, because those are kind of the two. It's difficult to let those two things coincide. And again, I was just extremely lucky that the way that I'd been trained, the qualifications that I had earned as a young teacher allowed me to receive job offers in New Zealand and Canada. And I didn't take all of these job offers, but I was able to travel a lot and teach in a lot of different countries and experience a lot of different cultural ways to appreciate these art forms for students and for adults too, which is really fun. So I was just really lucky that I got to make those decisions.
You didn't have to do either or. You got to do the travel and the career. You said we would talk a bit about the relationship between music and dance. So back to your childhood. Besides dance, did you have a strong background in music? And did you play the piano? Did you play an instrument? Were you in the orchestra? And was there a time at which you might have wondered which was a greater interest, music or dance?
I'm not sure we were very musical. In fact, one of the rules that I haven't decided whether I'm grateful to my parents or furious at them for was that we had to play 2 instruments. We could play the piano, but if we chose the piano, we had to play another instrument as well. And their goal was to get us an orchestra experience. I skirted the rules a little. I loved the piano. The other instrument, I sometimes played the saxophone in jazz club, but the guy let me play the bass line on the keyboard, and I'm not sure my mother ever knew that. But so I never really excelled. My aunt actually has been in the Des Moines Symphony as the second chair violinist for the last 25 years. So I have a lot of musicians in the family. That was never my bread and butter. Certainly, I would say that my connection to dance probably can be best described as coming through the music. I think the music was more important than the specific dance style or the specific choreography or any piece of the dance puzzle. And that has stayed with me. And I've realized that isn't the way that everyone has a relationship with ballet in my profession, which is something that you kind of assume as a child that everyone thinks about things the same way you do. And as I've gotten to work with more and more professionals and choreographers, I mean, there are choreographers who create their work absent of the music and then apply music later. Merce Cunningham was a good example of that. That is completely foreign to me. I don't understand how that works in your brain, but it works for a lot of very, very talented people. But for me, dance was an expression of the music. So they really went together, but I never considered performing as a musician. In fact, as a person who could perform pretty easily in a tutu, I hated playing the piano in public. I would get sweaty palms in the way that I think other people feel about public speaking. For some reason, playing the piano in public made me feel that way. So
but
that was never an option.
The voice is an instrument, and I heard you say musical theater. So what about singing on a stage?
Well, you might have picked up from this conversation that I sound like a boy with a cold. So while I can sing decently in tune a solid 50% of the time, I'm not sure that I have the particular skill set for that.
Okay. Before we start talking more about the therapeutic benefit of music and movement, tell us a little bit about Ballet Des Moines and your position at Ballet Des Moines.
Sure. Ballet Des Moines has been around in some capacity for nearly 60 years. It was actually founded in 1965. It's been through a few different iterations, different names, different leaders. I moved here, as I said, about 4 years ago. And despite the pandemic, which was pretty devastating to many of my peers and colleagues, Ballet Des Moines has really reinvented itself over the last 4 years, and we are doing a lot of really exciting work. A big part of who we are is not only excellence in performing and artistry, but also in relevance and accessibility. A lot of what we do is not just creating something beautiful and moving that the upper echelons of society can access, but making something that is relevant and telling stories that are maybe less often heard, making sure that we're lifting up choreographers and subject matter, but also partnering with a lot of community entities to make sure that their mission is being met as well as ours alongside ours. So using our platform to lift up other voices, and working a ton in the community with kids to try and not necessarily teach them any dance. We don't have a dance school, so we don't really do that. What we do is invite them to participate through the arts in educational opportunities. So a great example of that I'm proud of was when we, our artistic director created a production of Salem based on the Salem witch trials last fall. So that was 22. And around that production, which ran for 2 weeks in the Stoner Theater under the Civic Center, we had a group of Oak Ridge students who learned, who participated in a course called Power and Justice. And it was partnered with the Iowa State Bar Association, as well as the Drake Law Clinic and the Wrongful Convictions Unit. And those students went to courtrooms. They came to the studio and met with our choreographer and dancers and embarked on a, I think, 5 or 6 week course exploring the justice system. But also, I think we can all imagine the story of Salem in our minds. It's really a story about fear and about society and about lots of concepts that are not directly related to the fact that the art form existed or the ballet existed, but the visceral experience of the ballet, of watching the performance, of talking about the movements involved in the performance, helped those students to really access some subject matter that they might not have felt super connected to prior to that type of an experience. So for me, that was a great example of something that we do pretty frequently. It's a big part of who we are. So I'm proud of the work that we're doing, and it's growing exponentially. We tour statewide every summer, and we just got back from doing the Nutcracker here, but also in Fairfield and in Algona, with kiddos from both of those communities, and working with a lot of different groups, both here and in other communities across Iowa.
And you're also, I know, involved in using movement to help in various settings. So bringing folks into Ballet Des Moines to help with. So we were talking a little bit about, for example, Parkinson's disease. That's a neurologic movement disorder, but where movement can be therapeutic.
Yes, Ballet Des Moines is right at the beginning of our journey into some of these realms. But Dance for Parkinson's started in New York out of the Mark Morris Contemporary Dance Company, which is a dance company very much rooted in classical ballet, but doing more contemporary performances. And they started what is essentially now a worldwide course that has just had incredible results. And we are launching a partnership to try and bring that to Des Moines so that it can be part of what we're offering. We have been working already. We have some incredible dancers in the company this year who've shown particular interest in working with different community groups, whether that's the aging community or we have a partnership with Dance Without Limits, which is a group that works with physically differently abled students. They're all youth, I think. We also did a course in Fairfield, very similar to that, with a differently abled community. And then one of the other things we do that is less about the rehabilitation or physical movement, but is still important in terms of access, is working with groups like Cultural to bring not just, we spoke about this a moment ago, not just the Western version of dance expression, but allowing dancers and artists from other communities and cultures to stand up on the stage with us and show communities how they use dance in their culture, and whether that's storytelling or even community building. There's a lot of movement-based ritual in a lot of different cultures and countries. So we try to make sure that those stories are being lifted up alongside ours. You know, the Nutcracker is a pretty ubiquitous Western tradition, but our Nutcracker education program works with Cultural to bring. This year it was South American artists. Last year it was South Asian artists. And so we took some of those artists with us out to different communities across the state. And I think that is exciting because those communities may not have ever seen an Indian dancer or a Thai dancer doing traditional ritualistic storytelling through movement. So I think those are great examples of how movement can be used in lots of different ways.
Yeah. As you say that, it conjures up memories of my childhood. I grew up in small parts of South Dakota, and probably I would say almost certainly the first dance program I ever saw was an American Indian
Really?
festival which featured dancing.
Mhm.
I would say that's probably the first time that I ever witnessed performers in dance.
And would you say that that performance was one-sided, or was it community-driven in terms of engagement between the dancers
Oh,
and the
I would
audience?
say it was very much at a time of distinctively
Okay.
other. It was an exotic experience
Okay.
of going as a non-indigenous person,
Sure.
going to an indigenous festival
Yeah.
to watch it
Okay.
from the outside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The indigenous communities have such a rich history of utilizing dance as a way to build community. And one
Mhm.
of the things that we talk about with our youth programs is the data that shows that engaging in any art education activity as a youngster will increase your civic engagement.
Mhm.
And so that happens even with the Western, programs that we have, but it is so much more obvious and visceral and visual.
Yes.
You can just see the way that, my husband works in international policy and travels with staffers from DC across the world. And I have videos of him and his DC staff in their suits and ties and skirts standing in groups where these fantastic communities of kids across Africa are not really giving them a choice whether they're dancing with them or not. They
Mhm.
are all
Mhm.
part of the dance, and it is
Yes.
just community building at its richest. It is
Yes,
incredible.
I had the opportunity to live in Hawaii for 2 years, and
Great, yeah.
and then traveling in Africa. And when I described that experience in South Dakota in the 1950s, and maybe there was more of that going on, but I'm just kind of remembering. But what do you think it is about? What are the things about movement, and in particular dance, and throw in the music with it, that makes us feel better?
I mean, it's a big question.
Mhm.
I think one of the pieces of that puzzle is the ubiquitousness of movement. I mean,
Mhm.
there aren't a terribly large number of life forms that I know about that don't move in some way. And I would say that if you imagine, there's a great quote that I can't rattle off properly, but you do dance before you walk. Babies, if you play loud music or a strong beat, they will probably move in response to that. I have
Mhm.
visual memories of my then baby just losing her mind every time Phil Collins came on the radio. My mother-in-law just loved it, but something about that music made her move her body. And long before any language was there, long before any real back and forth in terms of verbal exchange. So I think there is something innate about dancing and music and those things, that movement going with the music. I think that there's a lot to answer your question, though. I think that there's, with ballet specifically, a lot to explore around coordination and strength. I actually, related to having kids, I injured my back, and I hadn't danced in a while. I stopped dancing when I started working in administration, and found out quickly, just even with teaching, how much I had physically been relying on that strength, that I then lost and injured myself. And that some of the physical therapy that I was guided to do, halfway through them explaining it, I just said, "Oh, you're asking me to do first position. Like, you're asking me to do the thing with my shoulder blade that I've known how to do my whole life." They would never describe it as a ballet position, but that was what they needed me to do in terms of compression and strength and holding balance and tension. So I think that there's a lot inherent in movement styles like ballet that teach you how to connect to your body, how to align yourself, how to promote blood flow and breathing, and a lot of things that are going to be therapeutic in a lot of different ways. But I also think that the emotional side of it is really important. I think that the healing and the growth that you can experience, whether no matter how you show up at the beginning of that experience, I think that you almost always leave in a better place in some capacity, whether that's all an internal journey or it's a journey with the community that you're in. I think that it's really hard to leave an adult tap class not in a good mood. So I think there's something there that is pretty universal.
Mhm.
And like I said, it kind of transcends language and culture in many ways. It can also bring those things out and tell specific cultural stories. But I think that in general, movement and music, it's everywhere. It's a part of us.
And back to the essence of movement. And so you talked about how you were getting physical therapy, and the position that they wanted you to go in was reminiscent of a ballet first position. And when
Have
you
you had some training? I can tell.
just a little
Yeah.
bit, just um, what about now? I would imagine that you've taken yoga and you've maybe done Pilates. When you do those activities, do you find parallels in what you were taught in a more traditional ballet? And I would assume maybe when you were a kid doing ballet, you weren't going to yoga and you didn't know about
Yep.
Pilates. But now that you, through a ballet, have a better understanding of the various ways in which your body can rotate and move and extend and
Yes.
abduct, and
Yes.
that you relate your body more to movements that you're asked to do in other situations.
Very, very much so. And in fact, the only real reason that I would like my daughters to experience dance is for the knowledge of their bodies that all dancers that I know have, because I do think that no matter what you do, whether you go on a walk or a run or you pick something up and you twist, a dancer has spent time with all those muscles and knows what's going on and knows what feels wrong and what feels right. Now, they don't always have a healthy relationship with pain. I'm going to tell you that right off the cuff. But I do think that that is vital and can really assist in continuing your health through various stages of life, whether that's, parenthood or just aging or all the things that we go through. But yeah, I think that the micro strength that you gain through subtle movements, such as in ballet, specifically, I'm thinking about arms, but obviously with your legs as well. Those are a little hard to replicate in more cut and dry exercise forms. I think that some of the moving through, I remember learning the phrase, oh, now I've forgotten the phrase. It's like when you're, oh shoot, it's just flown out of my head. When you're, instead of training in a gym, you're actually functional training. You're picking something up and moving it over here.
Mhm.
The muscles you've just engaged are probably not something nowadays we're better at it. But back in the day, that wouldn't have been an exercise with that twist. Whereas when you're dancing, you might learn a basic movement, but then you might be asked to look over here while you do it. Well, you've immediately twisted your body in a way that was slightly different from the last time you did it. I think the other part that I like to make sure stays in the mind is that I do love a yoga class and a Pilates class, probably because I like to push myself. As a dancer, I learned the skill of knowing when I'm working and when I'm not working. But when you take a ballet class, at no matter what skill level, there is a piece of what you're doing that is you. It's your artistry that you get to add on top of that. So it's doing the knee bend or the arm raise or whatever exercise you could be doing in a gym or a physical therapy or an occupational therapy environment, but you're doing it with a bit more feeling and you're doing it with some feeling that's personal. And I think that there's something to be said for that, to how that feels to express that through your body. Because we don't all express everything.
Yeah.
The same
No,
way.
that's very good. I mean, you go to the weight room to do biceps, you don't see people adding a lot of creativity and
No.
artistic flair to their, biceps curl. But
It's probably not super safe too, but
um, maybe talk a little bit about some of the early times where you have been involved, either as a student or as a teacher, where you specifically were using dance for therapeutic intention, and whether it was for yourself, or you mentioned the Parkinson's, or you mentioned children with some disabilities, where you brought dance into the picture specifically for its healing property.
I'm not sure that I have ever done that on purpose, the way that you're describing it. I think that I have seen it happen and am now, as part of Ballet Des Moines, building. We're hoping, we're just this week, in fact, moving to a new downtown location, beginning the move. And one of the reasons we are excited about that is to start to build and coalesce some of the things that are happening across the industry, across the country, and honestly internationally around that exact idea. I've witnessed a lot of it. I've seen it happen in classrooms, but like I say, almost as a byproduct. I had students, I remember a student with dyspraxia, which I feel like maybe is called something different. Does that actually sound like something here?
And
I grew up in England, so we
yes,
use different words for things.
Yes. So I'm blocking on what dyspraxia.
I'm not going to be able to give you an actual medical diagnosis, but it's a physical, not alignment, more of a coordination issue. And I remember having a student, I think I was in Scotland teaching at the time, who had to wear different colored socks so that she could, her proprioception, her awareness of her own body was different from a normal kiddo's developmental awareness. And so when you've been teaching for a couple of years, a student, to know their right and their left and which side of their body and which things go with which other things, that are coordinated movements, it was a lot harder for this kiddo to do that. And so I wouldn't say that I had sought out that child and sought to teach them with any specific goal in mind, but watching them and other students of the same ilk flourish in these environments that maybe at first glance seemed out of reach to them, but actually were even more beneficial to those kids than the ones that found it super easy to pick up the movement or were doing many of those things. The incremental benefit of having that movement added to their life and their day-to-day experience, I think, when it wasn't something that they felt confident doing in other parts of their day. I think that was really powerful. Just her confidence. I will always remember how proud she was when she got things right.
When I think of other movements, for example, Tai Chi, I'm aware of the body of evidence that shows that Tai Chi, which I'm sure to the unskilled eye is, we could call it a form of dance. I know it has a different history and it comes from more of a martial arts, but that just looking at what's going on, it's movement with patterns, and that the great body of evidence showing that it's beneficial in helping with balance and coordination, and even some evidence that doing those sorts of repeated maneuvers that you learn and sort of memorize can also help with cognitive impairment, so that it's helpful with cognitive impairment, movement, balance, and probably also emotions.
And I'm not a researcher, but I have seen research on those exact same outcomes particularly with youth. I know that we are at a point now, 20 years ago when it was just starting, it was exciting, but we didn't have the results. But now they've been following kids that had access to these types of programs at a young age and seeing how, like you say, not only physically, but cognitively, how it changed their outcomes. There is definitely a body of research. It's not, I don't think, as well established as other forms. I think that it is a little late to the game, but showing, like you say, balance. I know there was a specific study around, it might have been Parkinson's and falling, how often patients were falling when they were taking part in dance. And it's very much the same. It's balance. It's, again, proprioception, awareness of your body. And also just kind of that, the strength, you're building strength in moving on purpose in certain ways that I think can be just really helpful in, again, your confidence, your physical confidence, moving into new spaces and walking and experiencing things, and trying something new is important.
And then if you're doing it in a group setting, there's also the social benefits that happen from learning something with others
And again, those feelings, my understanding of the brain chemistry there is that there's enormous benefit to the feeling of success that you get from participating in group movement and music activities. I mean, I think that there's data around just clapping activities, that how much your brain receptors are telling you this is a great thing that you're doing when you're just all clapping at the same time. But that feels good. And so I think that in terms of community building, in terms of confidence building, and there's a lot of evidence, as far as I know, just on depression and anxiety, and how dance therapy can actually really turn that around.
So this year, 2024, for the first time, Above and Beyond Cancer is going to do teaching, participating in social dance and
Awesome.
instruction
Mhm.
and dancing as something that we're going to bring into Above and Beyond Cancer, as something to, I think we're probably doing it as much for the mood elevation and socialization, but obviously the movement and the music has some benefits. How would you see doing ballet as a therapeutic endeavor for individuals, for example, cancer survivors?
It makes me excited to think about exploring that. I will never forget what teaching adults felt like. Adults of all ages and all experience levels. And again, I remember teaching adult tap classes where folks would come with their spouse or partner. And that experience is obviously very different from, a senior beginner's ballet class that is a lot more to do with fundamental movement and flexibility and some basic things. But I think the potential is really exciting for what it can do, like you say, on many levels. There's the physical component, there's the individual confidence and strength building, but then there's also the community element. And I think that in all of those ways, it can be therapeutic and extraordinarily beneficial. So it would be very exciting for me to think about it.
Yeah. Sure. Talk a little bit more about what you see as the therapeutic benefits of music. And I use the phrase therapeutic benefits, but I mean, why do you think music makes us feel good? And what are ways in which you, for yourself, or let's say for your kids, you shared are 4 and 6, that you intentionally bring music into your life or their lives?
You ask great questions. I think that I remember reading a book a couple decades ago, so I apologize in advance if I misquote, but I remember reading that fundamentally your brain releases endorphins every time when you're listening to music. I think what you're doing is actually predicting the next thing that you're going to hear. And every time you get it right, your brain goes crazy.
Oh.
And it's these tiny little infinitesimal moments of validation that you knew. And when you've studied music, and I was lucky to study music, and you think about that in terms, I'm going to get a little nerdy, I'm sorry, but you think about that in terms of a chord progression. I'm not sure if those words mean anything to anybody else, but there's melody in music. There's also just the chord structure, that there is a really fundamental component of, it's about to end. There are ways that you may never be able to put language to, and I'm not even doing a good job, where you can hear in a song that it's about to be the end of that stanza. It's about to be the end of the song, or the end of that chapter, that verse, whatever it is. Those are chords that have been, for hundreds of years, utilized in those patterns to teach our brains that this is a crescendo. This is exciting. This is getting bigger, not just volume, but the way the music works, the way the chords work. So I think that there is a very deep-seated relationship between music and our brains, that some of us may be really geeky about, and others may just appreciate putting the radio on. I also know that, and again, I come from a strange family, but my older kids specifically, she started singing in tune before she could talk. She would sing songs and modulate them when she realized she couldn't reach the top note. Instead of just singing it out of key, she would modulate the rest of the song down. And I would listen to her at 9 months old in the car, just be like, she sings better than I do. And she has no words yet, but she can. So I try and take their lead. I don't actually hope to push anything on them, but I do think that experience of figuring out how to utilize and understand music can be really rich. And it can also open so many doors. I look at the arts as not an end goal for really anyone. I very much support anyone who wants to be an artist in any given form. But for me in my life, and certainly as a parent, but also as the leader of an institution, my goal is not to create a million ballet dancers, or even to create a million people who think ballet is the only thing they should be doing in a theater. I would love for you all to attend, but I want everyone to find art that speaks to them and helps them to understand themselves better and their families and their experiences, their communities and their cultures. Like, that is the goal for me. It's not about becoming ballet dancers or becoming artists even. It's about, does my kid feel her most confident when she's singing? And how can I use singing in a choir to help her to maybe speak in front of a board when she's an adult, or maybe get up on a stage one day, or be on the radio, whatever it is that she decides she's going to do with her life. Encouraging her to do things that she's interested in now and pushing herself in various ways around that, I think is the art piece of that allows it to be very individual and very personal. And I think that's really important.
In the world of dance, and maybe this is more what I might think of as modern dance rather than ballet, but are you aware of programs where creativity is used to express emotions? For those folks who are just kind of getting into dance, that it's as a therapeutic endeavor. I mean, you definitely, when you watch dance, see lots of emotions, and you can, it seems intuitive that just like singing can be very emotive and help, not necessarily ironically, but having a good cry can make you feel good. To express either fear or sadness in voice or movement can help perhaps work through some emotions.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that dance takes all forms, and storytelling in dance can be classical, Shakespearean, or, the Nutcracker. It can be a storybook. It can also be something more visceral, like the Salem witch trials. It can be much more abstract than that, and be, about fear or love. We have a program coming up about love that is not necessarily abstract in terms of it's not that some of the pieces will be classical in terms of the movement, but what they're expressing is less of a linear story and more of just an emotion. There's also moments, we just in the fall did Jekyll and Hyde, and our extremely wonderful artistic director, I remember he was in a meeting with me when he realized that before he could set one of the scenes on the dancers, he needed to ask them if what they were going to be doing was going to be triggering for them in any way, because it was a violent scene where Dr. Hyde, or Mr. Hyde, was attacking a woman in the streets of London. And it impressed me on so many levels that it occurred to him to do that. But also, it was very interesting to me to talk to audience members who were uncomfortable during that scene and experiencing emotions of their own and processing things that had happened to them while watching a story that was not theirs. They weren't telling their story. We were telling a story that someone else fundamentally wrote, but at the same time, we were exploring human experiences in a way that I think does help you process. I think there's always support and growth in knowing that you're not the only one going through something. And so whether it's what an artist is intending to communicate or just what you are getting out of something, and this is the same for any art form, I think it's extremely, I would use the word therapeutic, which in this context is a little more specific, but I really think that I certainly feel better when I feel seen or understood or represented in those ways.
So I think that when we've used music as an example, so we've had as guests music therapists. So there's a training program for being a counselor, but employing music as part of counseling.
Yes,
so that
exists for dance too.
Yep. So music therapy, dance therapy, but then there's also music as therapy. So where, we might participate either in making music, singing together or drumming together, or going to a symphony and just watching, but maybe being educated before we go about the movements and the music. And, we all, uh, clearly music therapists and Maestro Junta was a guest too. People over centuries know how to write. There's a reason other than the storyline that we burst into tears
Absolutely.
at Les Mis when Fontaine is singing her song. It's
Yes.
not just the storyline. There's something about the choice of
Yes.
chords and music and key that bring up those emotions.
Absolutely.
So having music as therapy by witnessing it, but dance the same way, going to a beautiful expression of emotions brings the emotions up and
Absolutely.
can be cathartic for someone just watching.
Yeah. And sometimes I find that the most, especially in my line of work, I get to see a fair amount of new creations as well as traditional performances. We had a choreographer from Chicago come during the pandemic and work with our company for 5 weeks. And she created a ballet that we called Kiss by and for Des Moines. Now I'm getting the name wrong. But it was about love and the concept of kiss, because during the pandemic, physical closeness was a challenge and a topic of discussion. And what was interesting to me is it's a very contemporary dance piece. And everybody experienced it very differently. I think that everyone watching the Sugar Plum Fairy has a pretty similar, not the same, but a pretty similar experience of the ups and downs of the movement and the music and the set and the scene and what we're doing. And it's probably December and you're probably in a beautiful theater. This was very different. Everyone had a very individual response to that. And that tells me that there was something that they found in that dancer's facial expression or their movement or the way that the stage was dark, except for one small point of light. There's a lot of pieces to the artistry in a dance performance that really speak to the audience in different ways. And I had a conversation with a colleague of mine who'd seen the ballet in rehearsal for months and months and months. In fact, the time that I'm discussing now, she'd come back and they were performing it again in a separate production 2 years later. We both witnessed a piece in this ballet where a dancer is being essentially lifted above other dancers' heads and moved around. And I don't know if it was where I was in my journey as a parent or a person in that day, but it spoke to me in a way that I had never felt before. And I turned to my colleague at the end of the performance and saw that she had been crying. And again, this was not the first time we'd seen this ballet. We had seen this ballet countless times. But seeing that it moved her in a new way and feeling that it moved me in a new way was really powerful to me, because not only are experiences in theaters and with many forms of art powerful potentially, but they can be powerful in different ways on different days,
right?
With different artists, with different people in the room in different places. Like there's just so much potential for the journey to continue. And it's fun.
Well, I'm excited about working with you to come up with a program and see what we could come from it. And obviously, ballet, many people are interested in trying something new. And I would say most people I know have never taken a ballet class and probably don't have quite of an understanding. But in terms of, physical control of your body, and especially as we get older, even trying to approximate certain positions. I think of it like yoga, and
Absolutely.
And that I'm sure that what we would teach would be forgiving and understanding that we may not be able to get into certain positions, but that understanding and control of your body, what it feels like to use your muscles, to stretch, to try to get in positions that the physical demands, and then also to learn this discipline and to add the musicality to it as well.
Absolutely. I think that, like I said, the potential is incredible. And I will always be grateful for having ballet in my life, because as a person with what I think in the yoga world is described as a monkey brain, it's always jumping from one thing to another very quickly. Ballet is all encompassing. I would go into a ballet class, no matter how stressed and busy and what exam was the next day. There is so much to strive for. There's no room in your head for anything else. And I think that's a gift, to have a hobby that takes you completely away from the things that you are dealing with in your day-to-day life and allows you to pursue and push yourself and really be yourself in that completely immersive way. So I've always been extremely grateful for that experience because I know not everybody has a hobby that allows them to do that. So everyone can experience that.
You open for some questions.
Sure.
We're going to open up. So we've got a live studio audience here. So we'll get questions. And then also, if you happen to be watching us now live streaming, you can put your question in the comments section and we will be looking for that. So we're going to start it off here.
We've got a question from a viewer. She posed the question earlier, and it's right aligned with what you were talking about just now. It says, is it a mental escape from other concerns when one concentrates on dance movements? That's just what you were talking about.
100%. And I think that is, I think that that's one of the gifts of doing something in a, maybe this is the Brit in me coming out, but in a more formal way. I think that dancing on a dance floor at a party is really fun. I don't think that it's necessarily as much, depending on how much you've had to drink, as much of an escape from your life. I think that in a formal or organized moment of really understanding what you're trying to accomplish, having somebody tell you what position you're striving for, even if you're, trust me, I am eons away from the professional dancers and what our incredible team can do physically with their bodies. But that doesn't mean that I can't understand what my incremental next step is, and with every fingernail, every eyelash, every part of your body. So yes, I think the immersive quality of these art forms is part of their potential and their joy.
And there's this concept of flow, which is when you're engaged in an activity that requires your attention. It's difficult enough to require your attention, but it's within grasp of what you can do, that you have this sense of being totally committed to it. And you're right, your monkey brain is at peace because you are now one with what you're doing. And that is just has such therapeutic benefit to be one with what you're doing. Time goes away and you have just a sense of peace and calm and achievement and accomplishment.
Absolutely.
I had a societal question, really. In American society, is the appreciation and understanding for dance, ballet, is it being lost? And I'm thinking about my parents' generation, the movies and musicals and the great dancing heroes of that era, or is it just changing into something else?
That's a big question. I'd say a little of both in my experience. And I'm potentially the worst person to ask that question of, because my kid's first movie was Singing in the Rain. So I think that depending on your perspective and your personal experience of what you're passing on to the next generation that are close to you, I think things don't have to be lost. There are like 40 dance studios in Des Moines. The dance as a part of your youth experience is still alive and well. What I think has started to wither and needs some nurturing is making those experiences in your childhood more relevant and accessible, not only to different communities of children, but also throughout your life. I think one of the really powerful things that happened in my life was that I was in a pre-professional dance school through high school. And I taught there as well before I left. I then, as we've discussed, went a different path for a while, but I was teaching the whole time. 4 or 5 years later, I was attending an adult dance community class near my hometown in the UK. And a number of my old ballet class colleagues came in. And the number of them who had done the similar thing and pursued a desk job of some kind, were very smart, successful humans, had quit their jobs and started dance schools. It's at least 4 people, which is in a pretty small community. That was a lot of, and I thought it was remarkable that they had gotten so much out of their training in their youth that they felt it was the thing they needed to spend their time doing, even though they could arguably have had a slightly simpler career path in other ways. I think that if you are taught in a way that you learn and you get the things that we've been talking about out of it, I think that it can be a lifelong passion. And I wish that we did a better job in our society of building those pipelines and not having it be something your 6-year-old does for a year and then they did it. I think that there's relevance and, as we've been talking about, enormous benefit to having these types of hobby seems like not a strong enough word, but endeavors.
Passion.
So teaching ballet to cancer survivors, a lot of us have neuropathy in the toes and feet. And ballet requires a lot of time on your toes. How would you teach the cancer survivors?
I would challenge that ballet does not necessarily require time on your toes. First of all, I think a fair amount of the entire Dance for Parkinson's curriculum, I'm not sure you'd call it that, it happens in a chair. It is absolutely possible to teach very, very engaging dance classes in lots of different ways.
So we're not talking about getting 6-year-olds in toe shoes.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
I haven't worn a pair of point shoes in 20 years. And I'm not putting them back on. I do still own them, but no.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that I think that to the earlier question, I think that there are misconceptions about doing ballet. I mean, ballet can be moving our arms to music right now in the chairs that we're sitting in. And I think that we could all feel something and get something out of it without even standing up. I really think that the benefits do not require certain physical or really any eligibility. I think that everybody can access it.
So it really is expanding the definition of ballet and what we
100%.
think. And for those who've never taken any sort of ballet class, think of it as being up on your toes or a guy lifting.
And I think the best way for people to start to expand their minds, and I'm not here to plug the ballet, but I do think attending a ballet performance helps to understand that better, because you will very rarely, unless you're coming to the Nutcracker, you'll very rarely see a quintessential ballet when you come to see Ballet Des Moines. You will see pieces of that because it's part of what we're keeping alive. But you will much more often see expressions of humanity that take movement that is completely foreign to the things that everybody's picturing in a textbook. So I think that definition in the ballet world was expanded long ago, but I think the conceptions of people that aren't in the ballet world, and there's lots of people that aren't in the ballet world, have lacked. And I think we haven't done a good job of telling people what dance and ballet means now. And I really encourage folks you can do it on the internet too. You don't have to come to a performance, but performance is great. But I really think you can understand that the dancers don't wear point shoes every time they dance. There are scenes where dancers are on the floor. That's all part of what we're doing.
Yeah, this is just a kind of asking for a comment. I was down at the music festival downtown, and on a side street, just walking by, saw a whole group of people, and they were breakdancing. There were Asian kids, Latin American kids, African Americans. It was just fascinating. I was wondering, have you ever seen a collaboration between ballet and breakdancing?
Absolutely. In fact, I think it was in Europe that somebody redid Romeo and Juliet, and I forget which was the Montagues and which was the Capulets, but one of them was a breakdancing company and the other was a ballet company. It's a great example of how you can explore this. And, again, another way that this is all different from what people might be picturing is the music choices. The music, the one I was talking about earlier that was abstract, there were many scenes in that ballet that were really set to sound more than music. There was wind blowing, and there were excerpts from films that you might have recognized, and there was spoken word, and it really doesn't all fit in the boxes that we've created as society for it. And it's those moments of breaking out of the boxes that really make it as relevant as it is. And so I think that that's really the journey, is bringing everyone along on what we mean when we say ballet and dance.
Other questions? Any from our streaming community? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Blaire, for being with us. Thanks for telling us about Ballet Des Moines, which is obviously a gem, and it is being really expanded in terms of what it is and what it's doing for the community. And you're going to have a new home soon, right, on Walnut Street.
That's right.
And what's your next performance?
It's really exciting, actually. Love Letters is happening at Hoyt Sherman Place, March 8th and 9th. And it's a great example of what we've all been talking about. There will be 3 performances. 2 of them will be from, one will be from George Balanchine's body of work. He is arguably the father of American ballet. Now, he came from Broadway training and then Russian ballet training and created his own version of what we would now all call classical ballet, but the true story is much murkier. Then Christopher Wheeldon, who is one of the most prolific and important choreographers of kind of the next generation. And then Tom Mattingly, our artistic director, has been gathering submissions from the LGBTQ community across the state since August. We have a lot of partners in the community that have helped us to gather those submissions. Folks were asked to write letters about love in their community or in their lives. Potentially, many of them have written love letters to themselves in their younger or older forms. And Tom will be using those letters and those submissions as inspiration for the 3rd ballet in the program, which is called Love Letters. And that's his love letter to the gay community in Iowa. But it's going to be an incredible performance. And again, really running the gamut of classical, contemporary, and all of the things in between that can tell stories.
So March 8th and 9th at Hoyt Sherman.
That's right.
Wonderful. Well, we hope to see you guys there, and I hope you'll join us again next week. If you know someone that would benefit by watching this program, it's going to be available on demand tomorrow at the Above and Beyond Cancer YouTube channel and the Mercy One Cancer Center website. Please join us again next week for our cancer education series. Thanks, everyone.